What if some of the teachings in the Bible, now over 2,000 years old teachings most people think they know inside out, still hold secrets that have barely been explored? What if behind every sentence that seems simple, there lies a complex system, like a staircase where each step depends on the one before it, and skipping any single one means you never arrive anywhere? The answer to these questions lies in the scriptures themselves, and it will change the way you see every one of those words. One of those secrets is found in the text of the Sermon on the Mount, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. We submitted that passage to the artificial intelligence axiom, asking it to set aside centuries of religious interpretation and analyze only the structure of what was said, cross-referencing criteria from logic, psychology, and linguistic analysis. The result is nothing like what you would hear in a Sunday service. Axiom identified that the Beatitudes are not a random collection of nice-sounding advice. They follow a strict order. Each sentence prepares the ground for the next, and together they build a process of transformation from the inside out. The first step is the most counterintuitive. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In a culture that encourages everyone to see themselves as self-sufficient, this sounds like praise for weakness. But the Greek word used in the original does not refer to just any kind of poverty. It describes someone who has absolutely nothing of their own to survive on. In the spiritual context, it means recognizing that your achievements, your intelligence, your effort, none of it reaches what truly matters, and the result does not come later. The sentence says theirs is in the present tense. Access opens the moment a person stops pretending they can handle it on their own. The second step confirms this logic. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The natural reaction to pain is to run from it. Entertainment, medication, distraction, everything exists to pull us away from discomfort. But ignoring the fire alarm does not put out the fire. The mourning Jesus speaks of is not depression. It is looking at the wreckage and refusing to look away. In the original Greek, comfort carries the idea of someone who comes to stand by your side as a defender. Those who face their pain instead of numbing it receive something that those who run will never know. The third step is where most people stumble. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meekness sounds like passivity, but the Greek term praise was used to describe a wild horse that had been broken in. The strength is still there. It simply has direction now. It is the sword in its sheath because the warrior knows the right moment to draw it. Genghis Khan, Alexander, Napoleon, all of them seized lands through brutality and watched it all crumble. The meek inherit the earth because they are still standing when the violent have destroyed each other. The fourth step shifts the target of desire. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Jesus does not say those who think being righteous is a nice idea. He uses hunger and thirst, the two most brutal urgencies of the body. This proposes replacing what drives a person from within. Instead of chasing what satisfies for 5 minutes and then leaves an even bigger void, the pursuit becomes the order that comes from God. Those who find this righteousness are truly satisfied, free from the cycle of always wanting more. The fifth step breaks cycles. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Justice based solely on punishment creates a domino effect, vengeance upon vengeance, without end. Mercy interrupts that chain, and the payoff is direct because the way we treat others reshapes how we see the entire world. A harsh person expects harshness in return and ends up living in a hostile reality they themselves created. The sixth step speaks of perception. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The Greek points to something like a lens without distortion. If the heart is contaminated by hidden agendas, by internal lies, by concealed motives, the image that arrives is blurred. The person does not see reality, they see their own projections. A pure heart is a whole heart, and only in that state is it possible to perceive what lies beyond the visible. The seventh step is action. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. The word used is peacemakers, people who build peace where none exists. Different from someone who is merely peaceful by nature. The natural state of things tends toward conflict. Creating harmony out of disorder is active work, and whoever does it acts the way God acts. That is why they receive the title of child. The 8th step closes with an unexpected warning. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Anyone who has fulfilled all of this should be admired, right? Jesus says the opposite. Whoever lives this way will make people uncomfortable. Light irritates those who have grown used to the dark. Persecution is not failure. It is confirmation that the process worked. The entire sequence forms a journey. It begins with emptying, moves through honest grief, through mastery of strength, through hunger for what is right, through mercy, through purity, through building peace, and ends with endurance in the face of rejection. It is not a menu of virtues to pick the one you like best. It is a path with a set order, where each step supports the one that follows. This journey was not built without purpose. Each step shapes the person from within, but shaping from within without purpose would be the same as sharpening a tool and leaving it in a drawer forever. Jesus does not allow that kind of complacency. Right after describing who the follower must become, he reveals what that follower exists for. And he does it with 2 images that any fisherman from Galilee would have understood without needing an explanation. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. For anyone hearing this today, salt is a kitchen seasoning. But in the 1st century, in a world without refrigerators or preservatives, salt was the difference between eating and going hungry. When a fisherman pulled fish from the Sea of Galilee, he had just a few hours before the flesh began to rot. The only barrier between food and waste was salt. It penetrated the flesh, killed the bacteria, and held off decay. The Romans paid soldiers with portions of salt, and from that practice the word salary was born. Salt was worth as much as currency. When Jesus says, "You are the salt," he is not paying a polite compliment. Axiom, cross-referencing the historical context with the structure of the sentence, identifies it as a designation of function. He is saying that the world, left to its own nature, rots. The tendency of any society without a moral restraint is decay. Corruption spreads, lying becomes the norm, violence turns routine. The only element that holds back this decomposition is the presence of people who live differently. People transformed by that staircase who, by the simple fact of existing and acting in accordance with what they are, keep everything around them from falling apart. Salt makes no noise. It dissolves and works from within, invisible. That is the influence Jesus describes. No spectacle, no speeches. A presence that transforms without drawing attention to itself, but alongside it comes a warning that carries weight. If the salt loses its strength, what can make it salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. In Judea, salt extracted from the Dead Sea came mixed with chalk, sand, and impurities. If it was exposed to moisture, the sodium chloride was washed away. What remained was a white powder that looked like salt, had the appearance of salt but did not season anything. People would throw this powder onto dirt paths to harden the ground, and it was literally trampled. The message is blunt. The greatest threat to anyone who has received this function comes from within, from dilution. It is blending so thoroughly with the very environment you are meant to transform that you end up identical to it. The follower who adopts the same values, the same fears, and the same methods as the world around them keeps the appearance but loses the essence. And salt without potency is not neutral. It is despised. People may hate the salt that stings a wound, but they respect what it does. Salt that does not season receives neither hatred nor respect. It receives contempt. After salt comes light, and the shift in register is deliberate. Salt works hidden, light is visible by nature. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. In ancient Palestine, cities on elevated ground were visible for miles. By day, their limestone walls reflected the sun. By night, their oil lamps glowed in the darkness like a beacon. Anyone lost in the valley would find their bearings by that brightness. The city on the hill did not need to announce itself. It was seen because it was elevated. Jesus is saying that there is a visibility that is not a choice. It is a consequence. Whoever lives according to those steps does not need to advertise themselves. The difference shows through in the way they act, in how they respond to suffering and injustice. Hiding it would be as absurd as lighting a lamp and then covering it with a bucket. In the original Greek, the word used is modius, a grain-measuring vessel placed over the flame to snuff it out. Burning oil and wick only to block the light makes no sense by any logic. The lamp exists to be placed at the highest point in the house and give light to everyone inside. Jesus then makes a precise move. Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. The works must be visible, but the credit goes elsewhere. The Greek word for good works in this passage is kalos, which means both correct and beautiful, attractive, something that captivates the observer. The goodness in these people has a quality so far beyond the ordinary that anyone who sees it is drawn to look for the source. And the source points to the Father. The person functions like the lens of a telescope. When the lens is good, you do not even notice it is there. You only see the stars, salt and light. One works from within without being seen. The other works from the outside and is impossible to conceal. One prevents decay, the other reveals truth. Together, they define the mission of anyone who has climbed that staircase. It is not withdrawing from the world. It is penetrating it with everything that costs. When the listeners on that hillside heard all of this about salt and light, a question surely arose. If this transformation is so radical, do the old rules still apply? The commandments, the rituals, the prohibitions that Moses handed down and that sustained Israel for over 1,000 years, did Jesus come to throw it all away and start from scratch? Many people believe he did. There is a popular idea that Jesus brought a gentle message based on love, and that this cancelled the strictness of the Old Testament. Axiom, upon processing verses 17 through 20 of chapter 5 of Matthew, identified that this interpretation is not only wrong, it inverts what Jesus actually said. His words are direct. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. The Greek verb for abolish, katalio, was used to describe the demolition of a building or the annulment of a contract. Jesus denies that intention in the strongest possible terms, but the verb he uses in its place, plerou, does not simply mean to obey either. Plerou means to fill to the brim, to complete, to bring something to the fullest expression of what it can be. The law of Moses was like the blueprint of a building, precise lines, exact measurements, calculated proportions, essential but two-dimensional, ink on a flat surface. When the architect raises the actual building from that blueprint, he does not destroy the plan. He gives it volume and life. Jesus presents himself as that architect. He does not discard the design. He builds from it something the lines alone could not show. Then comes a sentence that should have stopped the crowd in its tracks. Until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will pass from the law until all is fulfilled. A jot is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, resembling a comma. A tittle is a tiny stroke that distinguishes one letter from another, like the line that separates a P from an R. Jesus is saying that the physical universe will vanish before the smallest detail of the law loses its validity. Heaven and earth are temporary. The moral law is permanent. This flips an assumption that nearly everyone carries. We treat the material world as solid ground and moral laws as opinions that shift with the times. Jesus says the opposite. The moral structure is the foundation. Matter is what passes away. If the smallest comma in that structure is altered, the effect ripples through everything, like a bolt torn from a running engine. He continues with a hierarchy. Whoever breaks a commandment and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom. Whoever practices and teaches them will be called great. The weight falls on the combination of practice and teaching. Teaching what you do not live spreads a distortion, like someone handing out copies of a map with a wrong route. Every person who follows it will get lost, and the responsibility falls back on the one who handed it out. But the sentence that truly shook those on that hillside comes in verse 20. Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. To grasp the weight of this, you need to know who the Pharisees were. They were the spiritual elite of Israel. They knew the Torah by heart, prayed at fixed hours, tithed on everything, including kitchen herbs like mint, dill, and cumin. They followed 613 rules with pinpoint discipline. In the eyes of the people, no one was holier than a Pharisee. And Jesus looks at the crowd of fishermen and ordinary folk and says, "Their righteousness must exceed that of these men. If the best are not enough, who could possibly measure up?" An ordinary worker does not have the time to compete with a Pharisee in prayers and fasting. Would the gate be closed to everyone? No. The Greek word for surpass, periseuo, means to overflow, to move from one dimension into another. Jesus is proposing something different. He wants a change of nature, a change of dimension. The righteousness of the Pharisees operated on the surface. It was measured by external actions, observable and quantifiable. Have not killed, clean, have not stolen, approved. Kept the Sabbath, top marks. It was a checklist kind of righteousness where all the boxes were ticked, but what was happening on the inside did not factor in. A Pharisee could hate someone with every fiber of his being and still be considered righteous, because he never laid a finger on the person. Jesus changes the standard. The righteousness he demands does not ask, "What did you do?" but "What did you want?" What went on inside you when no one was watching? Obedience stops being visible behavior and becomes an exposed heart. At this level, no one can hide. No ritual covers what goes on inside when a person is alone with their thoughts. This demand seems impossible, and that is exactly the point. It pushes you back to the first step of the staircase, to the recognition that on our own, we cannot reach this standard. This overflowing righteousness is not born from accumulated effort. It is born when a person admits their bankruptcy and opens themselves to receive what they cannot produce alone. This righteousness born in the heart needed concrete examples. Jesus took two of the most well-known commandments and showed that beneath each one lies a root that no one usually examines. The first was, "You shall not murder." Seems simple enough. If you have never laid a hand on anyone, you are in the clear. But Jesus aims straight at what happens before the act. "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment." The anger harbored inside, fed in silence, is already the same impulse that leads someone to take a life. The one who hates and the one who kills carry the same intention. The only thing separating the two is opportunity. Axiom, cross-referencing this passage with data from behavioral psychology, confirmed something that neuroscience would only demonstrate centuries later. When someone harbors anger toward another person, what happens inside the mind is a symbolic elimination. You erase that person's worth. You want them to disappear, to stop being who they are. Jesus details an escalation that reveals how contempt deepens. Whoever calls another raka, an Aramaic word meaning empty, worthless, will be answerable to the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of Israel. To say raka is the same as declaring, "You are worth nothing. Your existence carries no weight." And whoever calls another fool, moros in Greek, which in that context meant someone morally rotten and cut off from God, that person faces Gehenna, the valley south of Jerusalem, where the city's garbage was burned without ceasing. Whoever places themselves in the role of judge over another person's soul assumes an authority that does not belong to them. The progression is clear. Silent anger is already subject to judgment. Insulting by denying someone's worth is a social crime. And moral condemnation, when you decree that someone is a lost cause, reaches the gravest level. Right after, Jesus introduces a rule of priority that turned the religion of that era on its head. If you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift and go first to be reconciled. In a world where the sacrifice at the temple was the most sacred act, Jesus says, stop in the middle and go resolve the conflict. Reconciliation takes priority over any right. God does not accept worship from someone who is at war with their neighbor. He reinforces the urgency right away. Come to terms with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him. Life is the way. As long as you are breathing, there is a chance to settle things. After that, the account of pure justice kicks in. You will not get out until you have paid the last penny. A penny was the smallest coin in existence. If justice is demanded without mercy, the debt will be exacted down to the very last cent. The smart move is not to let it get that far. After anger, Jesus opens the second commandment. You shall not commit adultery. Another rule that seemed easy to keep. As long as you never physically betray, you are within the law. But he applies the same principle. Anyone who looks at a woman with the intention of desiring her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The Greek word epithymia has nothing to do with noticing that someone is attractive. It has to do with initiating within yourself the process of possession, of turning a person into an object of your pleasure. In that instant, the person stops being someone and becomes something. Neuroscience confirms that the brain activates the same regions in fantasy as it does in the actual act. The same circuits fire, the same chemicals are released. For the body, the difference between imagination and reality is minimal. Jesus said this 2,000 years before any brain scanner existed. The solution he proposes is shocking. If your right eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. This is not a literal instruction. The principle is that of emergency surgery. When part of the body has gangrene, the surgeon amputates to save the rest. If it hurts, it leaves a scar, it reduces capability. But the alternative is losing everything. The eye represents the channel through which temptation enters, what you choose to see. The hand represents action, what you choose to do. If a habit, a place, a relationship functions as a trigger, the instruction is to cut it. No negotiation, no half measures. Anger and lust reveal the same pattern. The problem is never on the surface. It begins long before the visible gesture, in the layers no one sees. What Jesus demands is that the cleansing happen at the exact point of origin. Our thoughts are not neutral. They carry weight, direction, and consequence. And when that truth sinks in, when a person realizes the depth of the damage they carry inside without ever having raised a hand against anyone, that is the moment when the morning of the Beatitudes makes sense. Not a weeping born of weakness, but of brutal honesty in the face of what we truly are. Up to this point, Jesus dealt with what happens inside a person. Anger, desire, the gap between what we appear to be and what we are. Now he moves into the most dangerous territory, what we do when someone attacks us. And what he proposes goes against everything human instinct screams at us to do. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist the one who is evil. Most people understand an eye for an eye as a barbaric principle of revenge, but the historical context shows the opposite. In the ancient world, if someone knocked out your tooth, you could kill his entire family and burn his house down. The law of retaliation was created to limit payback. One tooth for one tooth, no more. It was a restraint, not an incentive. Jesus acknowledges that progress, but says it is not enough. The problem with proportional retaliation is that it keeps the cycle spinning. You take my eye, I take yours. We are even, but we are both blind. The violence has not stopped. It has been regulated. To break the chain, someone has to absorb the blow without returning it. Axiom, modeling this dynamic across conflict scenarios, confirms that every violent response to an act of aggression doubles the total destruction. The only way to reduce evil is to introduce an element that absorbs the impact and does not pass it on. Jesus gives 3 examples carefully chosen for the cultural context of Judea under Roman occupation. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. A detail goes unnoticed. For a right-handed person to strike someone's right cheek, they would have to use the back of their hand. In first-century Jewish culture, a backhand was not an assault, it was a humiliation. The gesture of master to slave, adult to child, superior to inferior. A way of saying, know your place. The expected reaction would be to strike back or to cower. Both confirm the aggressor's power, but offering the other cheek changes the dynamic. By turning the face and exposing the left side, the person forces the aggressor to use a closed fist, which was a blow between equals. With one silent gesture, the victim refuses the position of inferior and says without words, "If you want to hit me again, you will have to treat me as an equal." There is a name for this: courage that disarms. The aggressor does not know what to do with someone who responds with neither fear nor fury. If someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, give them your cloak as well. Under Jewish law, a creditor could take the tunic as payment for a debt, but the cloak, which served as a blanket at night, was protected by law. Jesus says to hand over both. The person would be left naked in court. And in the culture of Israel, the shame of nakedness fell on the one who caused the situation, not on the one exposed. By surrendering everything, the debtor turns the courtroom into a mirror, exposing the creditor's absurd greed for all to see. The miser fighting over a tunic finds himself forced to face the ridiculousness of his own pettiness. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them too. The Roman law of Angaria allowed a soldier to compel any civilian to carry his gear, roughly 30 kilograms for 1 mile. It was one of the most hated humiliations of the occupation. The Jews counted every step, and at the exact mark, dropped the load on the ground. Jesus says to keep walking. The first mile is obligation. You are a prisoner of circumstance. But when the mark passes and you keep going, the situation flips. Now it is a choice. The soldier, accustomed to seeing hatred in the eyes of every conquered people, encounters someone helping him of their own free will. The confusion this creates in him is greater than any protest. The second mile turns the enemy into someone who listens and opens a door that armed resistance could never open. Jesus closes with a general principle. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. No conditions, no calculating a return. Whoever lives connected to a source that never runs dry can afford to be generous without fear, because their security does not rest in what they own but in the one who sustains them. The cheek, the cloak, and the mile are not passivity. In each case, the person who appears to be at a disadvantage seizes control without using violence. They refuse the role of victim, refuse the role of aggressor, and create a third way that exposes injustice and preserves the dignity of all. It is the meekness of that third step of the staircase in concrete action, strength under control, that refuses to be provoked and chooses the right moment to act. Not resisting evil with violence already seemed impossible. But Jesus goes further. He is not content to ask that a person absorb the blow. He demands that they love the one who dealt it. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat you. The commandment, love your neighbor, exists in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus. But hate your enemy was never in the original text. It was an addition the religious leaders made on their own, following binary logic. If I must love my own, then I must hate those who are not my own. This division between us and them lies at the foundation of every tribal structure since the dawn of civilization. Jesus tears that division out at the root. The word he uses for love is agape. In Greek, there are different terms for different kinds of affection. Storge is familial warmth. Eros is romantic attraction. Phileo is friendship, the warmth we feel for those we like. Agape does not depend on emotion. It is a decision of the will to act on behalf of another person, regardless of what you feel toward them. Jesus knows that liking an enemy would be psychological distortion. No one feels phileo for someone who wants to destroy them. Agape works differently. It is choosing with a clear mind to treat the other person with dignity when everything inside you is screaming for the opposite. He details 3 actions. The first is to bless those who curse you. The Greek eulogeo means to speak well of, to wish good upon, reversing the charge of what comes your way. The second is to do good to those who hate you, going beyond words to concrete action. The third is to pray for those who persecute you. Axiom identified that praying for the enemy shifts the conflict from the horizontal plane, where 2 people face off, to the vertical, where both stand before God. And prayer changes the one who prays. It is impossible to pray for someone sincerely and continue feeding hatred. It works like an antidote that purges the poison of bitterness from within. Why do all of this? So that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. The sun does not choose whom to warm. The rain does not select which field to fall on. God sustains the lives of people who use that life to deny his existence. He funds his enemies every single day, not because he agrees with them, but because giving is his nature. If you want to carry the title of child, you must act with that same breadth. If you love only those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Tax collectors were agents in the service of Rome, people who were universally despised. Even they take care of their own. Loving those who love you is biology. Any animal does it. The difference for the follower of Jesus begins where comfort ends, and the sentence that closes this section is the highest demand in the entire Bible. Be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. The Greek word teleos comes from telos, which means purpose, goal fulfilled. Something very different from without error. Perfect here means one who has reached the fullness of what they were created to be. God is love without borders, so the human being reaches their fullness when their love has no blind spots. This demand seems crushing, but Jesus knows the journey needs fuel, and he shifts to how to maintain the connection with the source. He addresses 3 practices: giving to those in need, prayer, and fasting. And in all of them, the same principle repeats: do it in secret. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Whoever does good to be seen has already received their payment, the applause, and nothing of real value remains. When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. True prayer requires silence and a closed door. It is in solitude that the voice of God becomes audible. And within this instruction, Jesus teaches the Lord's Prayer, a prayer so concise that every sentence is an essential request with not a syllable wasted. First the name of God, then his kingdom, then the bread for the day, the forgiveness of debts and protection from evil. When you fast, anoint your head and wash your face. Whoever fasts with a pained expression wants others to notice. Jesus says to hide the sacrifice and let only God see. The pattern is always the same. What is done in secret without a human audience holds real value. Because when there is no audience, there is no performance. All that remains is the truth of who the person is when no one is watching. And that is the only material from which anything lasting is built. Building something that lasts requires choosing where to invest. Jesus makes this concrete. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Moths destroy fabric, rust corrodes metal, thieves take the rest. Everything with a physical form is subject to deterioration or theft. Whoever places their security in what can be lost lives as a hostage to anxiety. Jesus proposes redirecting the investment. Every act of generosity, every obedience carried out in secret, every choice in favor of mercy accumulates in a place no external force can reach. Then he uses an image that seems strange but carries weight. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Axiom, upon analyzing the Greek term translated as healthy, found that it also means single, whole, focused in one direction. The eye is the way a person sees life. If the focus is divided between God and money, vision blurs and decisions go awry. If the focus is whole, everything works with clarity. Jesus eliminates any middle ground. No one can serve 2 masters. In that era, a slave belonged to a single owner. Divided loyalty was impossible. Jesus applies this to the inner life. Optimizing your existence to accumulate wealth and serve God at the same time is impossible. One demands holding on, the other demands letting go. Whoever tries both stands frozen in between. From this choice springs the question of anxiety. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body. In the original Greek, anxiety carries the sense of being torn in two, the state of someone trying to control the future while losing the ability to live in the present. Jesus points to the birds which do not sow or reap, yet the Father feeds them. He points to the lilies of the field, which neither toil nor spin, yet they are clothed in a beauty that not even Solomon at the height of his reign could match. If God takes care of what holds less value, how much more will he care for those he created in his own image? Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. When the kingdom comes first, everything else falls into place. When everything else comes first, nothing falls into place, and anguish takes over. Jesus shifts to judgment. Do not judge, so that you will not be judged. And he illustrates with an image impossible to forget. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? A speck is a tiny particle. A plank is a construction beam. The disproportion is absurd on purpose. Jesus does not forbid helping someone else. He forbids the arrogance of correcting without having first corrected yourself. First remove the plank, and then you will see clearly. In the very next sentence, a warning that seems to contradict. Do not give dogs what is sacred, and do not throw your pearls before swine. Not judging means not condemning the person. Discernment means evaluating the situation before sharing something precious. Delivering profound truths to someone who is determined to reject them with violence ends up being a waste that puts the one offering them at risk. Jesus closes with the image that ties everything together. Two men build houses. From the outside, they look the same. Same walls, same roof, maybe even the same street. The difference lies in what no one sees, the foundation. One dug deep and built on rock. The other took the quicker route and put everything up on sand. As long as the weather is fair, there is no visible distinction between the two. But when the rain falls, the rivers overflow, and the wind blows with force, the truth comes out. The house on the rock stands firm. The house on the sand collapses, and the text says the fall was great. The rock is the one who hears and acts. The sand is the one who hears and does not act. What separates the two houses is action, never knowledge. A person can know every word of this sermon, agree with all of it, admire the beauty of the logic and still be sand, because they never turned what they heard into a concrete step. And when the storm comes, and it always comes, no theory can hold the structure upright. The entire staircase that began with the emptying of the poor in spirit finds its final test here. The steps were not given to be admired. They were given to be walked one by one with the full weight of your body. The person who has truly climbed, who emptied themselves, who wept with honesty, who tamed their strength, who hungered for righteousness, who practiced mercy, who purified their heart, who built peace and endured rejection, that person has no reason to fear the storm. When everything around them crumbles, they will still be standing. If you liked this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom Investigation Project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.